Turn in your Bibles, if you would, to Genesis chapter 1. Genesis chapter 1. Let's pick it up at verse 9, and we'll go a few verses. And God said, "Let the waters under the heaven be gathered together unto one place, and let the dry land appear." And it was so. And God called the dry land earth, and the gathering together of the waters called he seas. And God saw that it was good. And God said, "Let the earth bring forth grass, the herb yielding seed, and the fruit tree yielding fruit after his kind, whose seed is in itself upon the earth." And it was so. And the earth brought forth grass, and herb yielding seed after his kind, and the tree yielding fruit, whose seed was in itself after his kind. And God saw that it was good. And the evening and the morning were the third day. And God said, "Let there be lights in the firmament of the heaven to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs, and for seasons, and for days, and for years." You might have asked yourself as we're going through, why is he going so slow? I mean, we'll be in Genesis 1 still in the 16th week when we're supposed to be through with Genesis. I go so slow because of the importance of getting off to the right start. Along about 1970, I was attending Eastern Michigan University in the summer on the way working toward my master's degree. And I had a class that was taught by a professor by the name of Jim Weeks. Can we put Weeks' picture up, please? The two pictures are the same guy. Now, this is from his obituary, which described him as the most compassionate person on the face of the earth. And this is him just before he died, I guess. He was the most profane individual I have ever come across. He said things in class that I don't think you could get away with today, and he was saying them back then. But he was a little bit of a comic. And if anyone would ask a question that it looked like it couldn't be explained, he would always say, "Well, that's covered by Weeks' second law." Didn't matter what it was covered by Weeks' second law. One day a kid asked him, "And what is Weeks' first law?" And he went from joking around to deadly serious. And by the way, he was so liberal that you could not believe it. The guy on the right, that's John Sinclair. Anybody ever heard of him? John Sinclair was the head of the White Panthers. And the feds were after him, and they finally got him and put him in jail for 10 years. And they got him on what today would seem trivial, a marijuana charge, and he was pushing the use of marijuana in the class. Well, Weeks invited him in, and it was one of these amphitheater type classrooms where everybody is looking down on the podium, and he was the guest lecturer. He brought probably his girlfriend, might have been his wife, I don't know, in with him, and she sat about right here with her back up against the wall while he was lecturing, nursing a baby. Well, let me tell you, from a cat that just came from Bob Jones University, that was quite a culture shock. That was far different than I'd been experiencing. Well, what was his first law? He turned very serious and he said, "This is it. If you don't accept my point of departure, I can't teach you anything." Now think about that. You're not going to correct it later on. If you don't accept my point of departure, I can't teach you anything. Now, if the point of departure is God, one can go from creation to the cross to the crown in eternity logically. If the point of departure is a bang, all is random. And George Gaylord Simpson, do we have his picture? I'm not sure we have it yet. Well, we'll just go on. We'll get him eventually if I don't have him now. George Gaylord Simpson is the kind of high priest, the acknowledged guru of all of the evolutionists of his era. George Gaylord Simpson says there is no right or wrong because everything is random. There is no goal in evolution, only a bunch of adaptations based on the ever-changing environment. You often hear people say, well, evolution is movement toward perfection. According to Simpson, it isn't. It's not even aimed at perfection. It's just random. The environment changes, you adapt. That's all that nature is. Now, we're spending some time on the topic because of its importance. And next week, we're going to have to change. Logically, we're going to have to shift into hyperdrive for you Star Trekkies that are out there. We're going to have to, I've done the math, cover about 4 chapters a week in order to get done. So that's really picking up the pace. 4 chapters a week, and we'll get to the goal line on time. All right. What are the assumptions? If you have to say you have to make an assumption, you've moved out of the realm of science automatically. It's an assumption because you can't prove it logically. And there are 3, really more, but there are 3 main assumptions that evolutionists make. And by verse 11, it's apparent that the basic system is in place and the ecosystem is now doing the progressing and the producing. Verse 11, and God said, let the earth bring forth. All right, God was doing it up to that point, but now he says, okay, earth, you're off on your own. Verse 12, and the earth brought forth grass. So it's bringing forth, it's doing something. There is a progression. Things are happening. Notice the trilogy. Grasses, ground covering vegetation. Herbs, herb. Bushes and shrubs. And then finally trees, large woody protrusions. Carefully note 2 key phrases that impact heavily on the monkey to man hypothesis, catalyzed, popularized by Charles Darwin. They are, number 1, after his kind. After his kind. And number 2, whose seed is in itself. Notice the emphasis on seed and seeds. One of the basic tenets of the evolutionary hypothesis, perhaps the fundamental assumption, is that all living organisms, at least animal organisms, are interrelated by common ancestry. This bit of fiction is not only unobservable, it is unscriptural. Check out Leviticus 11:13 through 32 later on when you've got time. And let me reinforce it by quoting another verse, 1 Corinthians 15:38 and 39, 2 verses. But God giveth it a body as it hath pleased him. And to every seed, now the seed is the reproductive process in the body. Every seed his own body. That would seem to settle it, wouldn't it? Is that enough? Should be, but there's more. All flesh is not the same flesh, but there is one kind of flesh of men, another flesh of beasts, another of fishes, and another of birds. So they're not all the same. and they're not interrelated. Over in Acts chapter 17, I think it's verse 21, he's made of one blood all men on the face of the earth, but after that he's fixed the bounds of their habitation. Most of the time that's thought of as bounds of habitation, bounds of where they can live on earth. But actually I think the primary teaching should be bounds of biological progression. That there are certain lines that cannot be crossed. There are certain seeds that won't intermix with other seeds. There is a reprogramming, if you will, and along with post-antiquity, pre-programming. The scripture and scientific truth is that implanted in each organism and each cell is a program, a design, a code. You have a code that was original equipment that God put in you. And that code allows for the replication of that organism, whose seed is in itself. And the idea here is the chicken had to come before the egg. What came first, the chicken or the egg? The chicken. Because the little chicklet in the egg couldn't have survived if it came first. The earth, the vegetation, the animals, and man will be created full-blown, mature, all grown up, ready to own the creation that is out there. This is not divine deception, it is divine conception, intelligence. It had to be that way, and therefore God designed it as such. To prove it, for instance, a baby Adam, created by God, we'll say, and there's baby Adam right there. Nothing else is there but baby Adam. How long would baby Adam last? About 12 hours, probably. Extrapolating on, the tree. What did the first trees look like? You think they had rings? What about the first rocks? If you radio dated the first rocks, what would they date? 0? I don't think so. They would have dated at some age. So what do I get out of all this? The apparent age is not necessarily the true age. The apparent age is not necessarily the true age. The scientist says, look at the rings in those trees. Yeah, Doc, trees by definition come with rings as original equipment. Look at those rings and strata in the crust of the earth. Like a pigskin comes with layers, air, inner tube, and leather. Yeah, but man did that. Yeah? Well, God did the other. So the earth comes ready to go as well, and those on it. Apparent age is not necessarily true age. And then education, the assumptions of education. The assumption is taught at, I'm sure, the University of Toledo and other places, particularly in their science department, but in all departments in all probability, every intelligent, educated person will admit to evolution. Harry Emerson Fosdick was a liberal preacher, a very liberal preacher. And he once made the statement, famously, I don't believe in the virgin birth, and I don't know of any intelligent man that does. I should have put him up there so you could throw a dart at him or something. Well, Sir Isaac Newton believed in the virgin birth. Was he a dummy? Robert Dick Wilson believed in the virgin birth, and he spoke 27 languages. How many do you speak, Doc? Bolton David Heiser, who was one of my professors, and I didn't really realize when I was taking him what I had in front of me. Supremely intelligent man. He got his PhD from Johns Hopkins. And Johns Hopkins is it. It's at the top of the pyramid. Scientifically and medically, it's even ahead of Harvard or any other Ivy League school. He got his PhD there. And he wrote one of the most incisive exposés of evolution that I've ever come across. What about Henry Morris? Is he a dummy? Henry Morris and a man by the name of Gatian, they had a third one on the team, I've forgotten his name, but they went around to all of the universities debating the science departments of the major universities, Ivy League, SEC, West Coast, everywhere. And they never lost. Why, if our position is so inane, why did they win? They debated at Notre Dame. The president of Notre Dame was there. Notre Dame, by the way, believes in evolution. Just because they're a, quote, religious school doesn't mean they're straight theologically, by the way. And the president got up after the debate and he said, well, it's a very simple conclusion. The creationists won the debate. You know, evolutionists evidence the same arrogance here as Fosdick. What they're saying is, an intelligent man by definition is one who agrees with me. If you agree with me, you are intelligent. You are a true intellectual. You are brilliant. If not, you're a dolt. Now, in their honest technical moments, however, you get a different slant. To display such confident erudition, to proceed with such cocksure arrogance, the evidence must be overwhelming. You guys are so confident, it must be awesome, the proof of your position. Run some of it by us, elucidate, enlighten us, enlighten our darkened obscurantist minds. Well, they can't. They can't. On a level playing field, they don't have an advantage. When they're in front of a class with students who are depending on them for a grade, and they can wash the student out any second, yeah, they're pretty brilliant then, because nobody can come back at them. They can hurt you. They can pistol whip you academically. In truth, the genetic code stamped in deoxyribose nucleic acid, as I'm reflecting back to my days in biology, DNA, men in the Hebrew, will only cooperate with a like kind, a kind that the Bible speaks of. There is then variation potential within kinds, but not the possibility of expanded kinds or intermediary crossovers. Now, the problem is superimposing the man-made Linnaean classification over the biblical kind. The Linnaean classification is made up by man, and although they use some of the same terminology, we're not exactly sure what the kind in the Bible was. My professor at Bob Jones, Dr. Blow, he said it would fall near genus with an occasional inclusion of family, and some would even say order. There can be some bleeding out at the edges, but the basic kind cannot be crossed. Noah, for instance, would not have had to have gathered every animal, but two of every kind, and then all of the variations of modern times would be possible from the kind. If you pick up a high school or college biology book, you'll often see the supposed interrelated train graphically laid out in full color, culminating in a hairless ape who had just 2 frames earlier dropped his war club and straightened up his hunched back. Do we have that progression? Do we have that picture? Those of you who have the material in front of you who are taking it for credit, no, that's not the one. That's not the one. We'll get to Dawn horses. That's not the one. But you've seen it. Starts out with a monkey who's little and gets a little bit bigger and a little bit bigger and a little bit bigger, and finally modern man strides out into the open in the last frame. This is accepted fact at most colleges and high schools. When you get examining what the facts are, what they're based on, you find that very, very little evidence is there to support it. You are bombarded with this view overtly and subliminally from about preschool on up. Very subtle. Walt Disney pushed it every chance he possibly got, even in the cartoons. So you have to be careful. I ran across this little bit of reincarnation and evolutionary doggerel. It's a poem written by Landon Smith. It's a love story, an evolutionary love story. I mean, this will just break your heart. I promise you, there won't be a dry eye in the house. When you were a tadpole and I was a fish in a Paleozoic time, and side by side on the ebbing tide we sprawled through the ooze and the slime, or skittered with many a caudal flip through the depths of the Caribbean fen, my heart was rife with the joy of life, for I loved you even then. Isn't that precious? Mindless we lived, and mindless we loved, and mindless at last we died. And deep in the rift of the Cardiac drift, we slumbered side by side. The world turned on in the lathe of time, the hot lands heaved amain, till we caught our breath from the womb of death and crept into light again. We were amphibians, scaled and tailed, and drab as a dead man's hand. We coiled at ease neath the dripping trees, or trailed through the mud and sand, croaking and blind with our 3-clawed feet, writing a language dumb, with never a spark in the empty dark to hint of a life to come. Yet happy we lived, and happy we loved, and happy we died once more. Our forms were rolled into the clinging mold of a Neocomian shore. The eons came and the eons fled, remember? Given enough time. And the deep that wrapped us fast was riven away in a newer day, and the night of death was past. Then light and swift through the jungle trees, we're making some progression now. We swung in the airy flights, we became monkeys, or breathed in the palms of the fronded palms in the hush of the moonless nights. Oh, what a beautiful years were to come when our hearts clung each to each, when life was filled and our senses thrilled in the first faint dawn of speech. We could now express our love one for the other. Thus, life by life and love by love, we passed through the cycles strange, and breath by breath and death by death, we followed the chain of change, till there came a time in the law of life when over the nursing side the shadows broke and the soul awoke in a strange dim dream of God. I was thewed like an auroch bull and tusked like the great cave bear, and you, my sweet, from head to feet were gowned in your glorious hair. Deep in the gloom of a fireless cave, when the night fell o'er the plain and the moon hung red o'er the river bed, we mumbled the bones of the slain. I flaked a flint to a cutting edge. Intelligence. Intelligence. You can now move and use implements. And shaped it with brutish craft. I broke a shank from the woodland link and fitted it head and haft. A hatchet or a spear he was able to make. Then I hid me close to the reedy tarn where the mammoth came to drink. Through the brawn and bone I drove the stone and slew him upon the brink. Well, you had better had some help if you slew a mammoth with a hatchet. That's all I've got to say. There better have been several of you. Loud I howled through the moonlit waste. Loud answered our kith and kin civilization. From west and east to the crimson feast, the clan came tramping in. Cities came up. O'er a joint and gristle and padded hoof, we fought and clawed and tore, and cheek by jowl with many a growl, we talked the marvel o'er. We taught evolution, where we came from. Are you crying? Did you love her even then? All right, the big lie. The big lie. The big lie is that evolution is based on science. Creationism is based on faith. And thus, because of that, we can't allow creationism, also known as intelligent design, into the classrooms of our public educational systems, particularly to infest those who will become teachers of youth, because they will swallow this creationism myth if that's allowed to happen. We must keep separate, as Thomas Jefferson put it, church and state. Church and state. That's the argument. It's bogus on several fronts. First of all, Jefferson's letter that they refer to was defending the Danbury Baptists and had nothing to do with what they're talking about. And he later, when he became the head of education in the Washington, D.C. area, said there are two things that that every teacher has to teach: Watt's sermons and the Bible. Now, yeah, he was a different sort, all right, and he had some bad moments, but basically he came around at the end and espoused at least the fact that the Bible was true mostly, except for the miracles part. The second thing that's wrong with the statement is that belief in God is the church. Belief in God has nothing to do with the church. You can never darken the door of a church in your life and believe in God. So you can't equate those two. Why, Dr. Blatherskite, do you call it religion? Why is it automatically religion? Because you can't disprove that God or an intelligent designer did it, or was there when it happened, or even exists. You can't prove your hypothesis that you call a theory that's not even a theory. Scientifically, it's a hypothesis. Well, what is a hypothesis? A hypothesis is something you just conjure up that there's not a shred of evidence for. It's a guess. A guess. Someone has said that evolution is a guess. The guesser has guessed so often he finally guesses it's true. A guess. Assumptions, again. They assume the first substance. They assume the boom. They assume accidental order. They assume earth. They assume the atmosphere. They assume the ocean bed. They assume the water. They assume the amoeba and the protozoa. They assume billions of years. They assume, but they won't let us, after assuming 10 things that they can't explain, they won't let us assume one thing we can't explain fully: the existence of God. And after we assume that, everything is logical. And after they assume all their assumptions, nothing is logical. Evolution is a fact. It is. Tell it to the little kiddies in grade school. Because you can't prove it, and if you're honest, when you get among yourselves, you will admit you can't prove it. And we covered that in, I think, the second lecture. All of the statements from all of those really smart guys at all hallowed educational centers that admitted that they really don't know anything for sure. Well, then how can they espouse it? Why do they espouse it? Why do they castigate anything else if they can't disprove the other point of view? They even believe it or espouse it because the alternative is unthinkable to them. If it's false, their evolution, they're left with God. That's all there is, if it's false. If they can't explain the first substance that was out there that they say exploded, they can't explain that, they have to assume it, then why are they so sure? They're so sure because they can't even allow the inkling of a chance that there was a creator God, an intelligent designer who was out there who got the ball rolling. Because if they do, they're left with God, which logically means a revelation, maybe even a book. God trying to contact man through a book. They're left with a redeemer, at least the possibility of one, even Jesus Christ. They're left with a day of reckoning, a judgment seat. There's a great day coming, a great day coming. They can't stand that thought. They don't want to be judged. They're left with, oh my goodness, here, horror of horrors, the possibility of a literal hell. A literal hell. A burning hell into which those that somehow do not please God, follow His rules and suggestions, might wind up. Even a lot of preachers today don't want to conjure with a literal hell. That train that they have gotten off the track onto a side track, they cannot allow to get back on the track. It's just unthinkable. George Gaylord Simpson again, a vertebrate paleontologist from Harvard University, the high priest. If, I'm quoting, if, now when you start out with if, that's not too reassuring that what you're saying is airtight. If, as must necessarily be true short of miracles, life arose as a living molecule or protein, what do you mean? Your protein is a miracle itself. You're assuming that the Bible has miracles and fundamentalists have miracles, but anything you come up with doesn't require a miracle. And it does. That a protein is a miracle, a break in the system. The intrusion of alien intelligence is totally untenable, so we just say that thing kind of by spontaneous combustion appeared. We've got it, Doc. You're a bigoted rascal who has a closed mind, a blind spot, and intellectual prejudice. You're typical of the whole genre of your type. Overeducated eggheads. Narrow, obscurantist, God-denying eggheads. In fact, in another article, Simpson admitted this: when a theory is not testable, such aspects of the theory are not scientific. So he's saying his own evolutionary hypothesis is not scientific. It's not testable. Well, then what does it take in order for a man to go with it? Anybody? Faith. Faith. Not scientific. And he goes on, and the disagreement is in the field of philosophy and not of science. In other words, you belong to the church of doom and gloom and boom. Let's quote another instance speculating about dawn horses. I don't know why they have made dawn horses so important in the evolutionary schema, but they're very important. They're always featured. Simpson again, he's speculating, admittedly, about these dawn horses. And he conjectures that a pair of animals known as condylarths suddenly gave birth to a litter of dawn horses. Kind of like a hen suddenly giving birth to a mouse or something. No connection, they're nothing alike, but it happened. I mean, they had to get here somehow. And given his premise of the possibility of interrelatedness that we discussed, I guess you'd have to say, I guess it's possible if you take his point of departure. Somewhere even he has to take a wild leap of faith, several leaps really. Dawn horses. And he further says, in the nature of things, this hypothesis cannot be ruled out categorically. In other words, not much evidence for it, but we won't categorically rule it out. And some respectable scientists support it. This is Simpson again. Nevertheless, it is so improbable as to be unacceptable unless we can find no hypothesis more likely to explain the facts. We're searching for a hypothesis here other than a wild guess, and we can't find one. Well, there's one, but of course we can't entertain that one. I go on. British botanist D.H. Scott. A new generation is grown up which knows not Darwin. Is even then evolution not scientifically an ascertained fact? No, it is not. We must hold to it as an act of faith because there is no alternative. Well, then why not allow other folks the same latitude that you have, Doc? They won't do that. William Bateson, professor of biology at Cambridge University, quote, "We have the impression that it is only by extraordinary acts of faith that biologists can suppose that the actual progress of life can be explained in terms that they adopt." D.M.S. Watson, professor of zoology in London University, said, "Evolution is a theory universally accepted, not because it can be proved to be true, but because the only alternative, special creation, is clearly impossible." This is quoted from the presidential address before the British Association of the Advancement of Science. Advancement? Professor A.P. Kelly is quoted as having said, "One of my university students said to me, 'We are determined to believe in evolution, not because it is true, nor that we believe there is any evidence for it, but because it has become the symbol of our liberalism.'" What an admission. You can't be a good, true liberal unless you accept evolution. W.T. Kalman of the zoology section of the British Museum. "We all, even the youngest of us, profess to accept the doctrine of evolution, if only as a convenient weapon with which to meet the fundamentalists." A convenient weapon. They had no real excuse to deny God before Charlie. Now they have an out. And brother, they have taken it. Let me unravel here. If we construct a better guess, and we can't, we're stuck with the unacceptable probable guess we have. That's what they're saying. We're stuck with it. It's improbable. It's not supported by facts, but we're stuck with it. Someone has described the whole evolutionary hypothesis again as a guess. A guess. Now, why is this important? I have confronted probably 25 people or so trying to witness that wouldn't accept Jesus Christ because of the battery of conclusive testimony from really brilliant scientists that evolution is true. Even Joe Sixpack on the street, he will say, well, look at all those brilliant guys that say it took millions of years and we came up from a monkey. That doesn't fit the Bible. Therefore, I can't accept anything in the Bible, including Jesus Christ. They feel safe in doing so because of the profound erudition of the opposition. If you'll excuse a pun here, they're blind leaders of the blind dying by degrees. They may have the degrees. It may look good. It may intimidate those folks that sit in their classrooms and read their stuff, but they're dying by degrees, and there's really nothing of substance behind it. Don't fear being categorized as a fundamentalist nut, a conservative ignoramus. Don't allow these high priests of hopelessness to push you over the precipice of intellectualism into the abyss of hell, because that's what has happened millions of times since 1859 and the publishing of The Origin of the Species. All right, Genesis 1:14. Now, to explain how we got from nothing to interstellar brilliance, the scientists profess there's one key ingredient that is necessary, and that is all that is necessary. And you know what it is by now because we mentioned it several times so far. Time. I guess their theme song would be, "Time is on our side." Yeah, we'll see. Whether espousing the encounter hypothesis, the collision hypothesis, the double encounter hypothesis, the turbulence hypothesis, the nebular hypothesis, the Laplace theory, they must have between 4 billion and 400 trillion years. Now, most of them guess close to 4 billion, but why be a piker? Go for the trillions. You can't prove either one. 4 billion years in order to develop what you see that is out there, to develop the intelligence to build this structure. Can you conceive of $1 billion? I heard on something the other day that when they're picking these football teams, these fantasy teams, if you pick a perfect team at the end of the year, you get $1 billion. And I talked to Brett, and he figured out that you have a better chance of winning the lottery than picking the perfect football team. Well, $1 billion is, you just can't deal with it. You don't know what it is. $100 is kind of a rarity in my wallet. $1 billion? 1 billion years? Easy to say, difficult for people to understand. So they fall back on given enough time, given enough time, given enough time. Then the Big Bang that exploded could send the fragments moving through space away from the center. Heavenly bodies accidentally then fell into precision of movements, of order, of orbits, of solar systems, of axis of rotation, of atmosphere, polarity. No orchestration, it just accidentally happened because you've got enough time. If all of this came from one firecracker, can you imagine the size of that thing? Well, it had to be half the size of the universe. Where did it come from? Again, back to the first substance. We're here, they say, because the dice came up 7-11 for us at least 100,000 straight times. And we are the only spot in the universe so endowed by this lucky break, the only ones in galactic history. And after the initial explosion, and on the fragments went out at tremendous rates of speed, they slowed down. I thought everything stayed the same, guys. It all slowed down. And they began to slowly rotate, and the gravitational pulls began to, make these things fall into solar systems. I'm going to skip some material here because I'm going to run out of time. Well, how do we know that it's as old as they're saying it is? Well, one way is carbon-14 testing. You can pick up a rock, or really anything, and carbon date it, and you can come up with the right answer, how old it really is. But that is assuming, if we are allowed an assumption, we'll give you another assumption here, that everything has always happened and will always happen at the same rate that is now happening. For instance, carbon-14 experiments in a controlled environment, when measuring objects of known age, have yielded an average error of 6%. Well, 6% doesn't sound too bad for an error. Yeah, well, it amounts to something like 25 billion years if you go with the older dates of the universe. They'd be off 25 billion years. The problem with the geochronology is twofold. First of all, it ignores the historical facts which would wreak havoc with its assumption of uniform development. What has happened that could not be measured? What happened in history that would just absolutely negate carbon-14? Anybody? The flood, the Great Flood. You say, well, but that's in the Bible. It isn't necessarily true. Well, then why is it found in 23 ethnic peoples around the world at about the same time? Stories of a flood. Some of them, like the Epic of Gilgamesh, older than even the biblical account. And that would change the ecosystem so dramatically that the assumed constant cosmic bombardment that produces a collection of carbon-14 would be invalidated on any object existing before about 2500 BC. And secondly, it is illogical. You remember, you date by observing phenomenon. That's how you build facts. And once you get that incontestable phenomenon, extrapolating back to origin, science tells us the sun has been losing 4,600,000,000 tons of mass per second per year since astronomers began to measure the process. Now, fortunately, it's so big That's not a threat. Don't worry. Don't lose any sleep that your sun here is going to go out because it's losing all of this mass. If one computes backwards and we assume a relatively new or young sun by evolutionary standards, we'll say 200 million years. Most evolutionists go with more than that, but we'll say 200 million years. You would have to add, if you have a piece of paper, put down a 900 and then trail behind the 900 7 more sets of zeros, 3 to a set. 900, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0. So if it's all happening at the same rate, that's a lot of zeros. And you would get a star originally that is already 332,000 times the mass of Earth, ballooning to approximately 1/2 the size of the known universe, if it all happened at the same rate. That's one star in one solar system, in one constellation. Four to 800 million years in the future, they tell us, our sun, our star, will supernova. And when it does, unless Jesus is back in controlling things, which we know is going to be, and when it does, the one lucky spot in the universe will be swallowed up, will be no more. And that's progress? I thought evolution was progress. It'll be snuffed out. But it's far enough we don't have to worry about it. Sufficient unto the day is the evil thereof. It raises an interesting question, philosophically. There is an offshoot of the fallen tree in the forest construct. If it's supernovas, and no one is left to observe the universe, will it be there? Will it have ever existed if everybody is gone? Or was the whole thing an episode from the Twilight Zone? Let me just close it out here. People are leaving me, I hope, because they are doing other things and they're not bored. Everyone you meet has a philosophical context. Everyone you meet has a faith. A faith. Sometimes it's a faith in themselves or a faith in man, but everybody has a faith. They get that faith normally from parents at first and then teachers. Those are the two main places you get it. Train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is, it doesn't mean he's going to go away from it and then come back. It just means when he is mature, when he is on his own, when he is out there and having to make his own decisions, he will not depart from it if a good job has been done. I don't know why people insist on paying money, hurting themselves to send kids to college where their faith is going to be ripped from them. Where every teacher probably that they come across in every classroom is dedicated to undermining their faith. But be sure they're so smart, Dr. Bartlett. They're so smart. Are they? Do they have Bible knowledge? No. Do they have knowledge of theological and historical training? No. Tell me, good doctor, what is Arminianism? What is Pelagianism? What is Antinomianism? What is Chiliasm and Donatism and Novatianism and Nestorianism and Sabalism and Docetism and Manichaeism and Homologuina and Anti-Homologuina and the pseudopigrapha and hagiographa? What are these things? Walk up and ask any university professor walking out of the doors of the University of Toledo that list, and he won't know 2 of them. They have a very narrow knowledge of something based on a theory that they've accepted that they can't prove. And most of all, they don't have the Holy Spirit, the ultimate teacher. And therefore, because they don't have the Holy Spirit, the Bible says, the natural man receiveth not the things of the Spirit of God, for they are foolishness unto him, neither can he know them, because they are spiritually discerned. I ask you, who are the ignoramuses? I'm going to leave you with a recommendation. Those are the dawn horses. I think we're behind the curve here. Go all the way to the end and get the book. Put the book up. Evolution in the Christian Faith. Bolton David Heiser, PhD, Johns Hopkins University. This thing is even by creationists and some evolutionists say that this is the best publication that has ever been available to the public on the subject. I had one, I loaned it, and some rascal stole it. So I had Gloria get on the internet, and she has ordered me one. You can still get them. I recommend you get this book. The Bible, A Good Church History, and this book. And you will never be at the mercy of an evolutionist again. You read it through 2 times. It has an amazing amount of facts in it. Get it, read it, and you'll be able to face anybody. God bless you.